All right, let's bring in Brian Colello. He is an Apple analyst with Morningstar. Brian, what's your reaction?
Overall, I think you're right. It's a small beat and probably not the sort of beat that investors were looking for, particularly on the watch side. You know, this is normally a ho-hum sort of quarter in the summer months because the iPhone has been out for about 9 or 10 months at this point. You know, the real lively piece to be looking at right now is the watch, and these numbers don't indicate that there were a lot of watch sales.
Apple's the ultimate sandbagger. I mean, they love to do this. So the pedestrian viewer might be saying, well, they beat. What's the problem? They always beat. I mean, 9 out of 10 times in the last quarters on earnings per share. They've beaten on revenues 8 out of the last 10 quarters. What's your first question for the call, Brian?
I think my first question is any sort of color we can get on the watch, whether it's whether it was constrained due to supply. We certainly knew there was a supply shortage when it was initially launched. But any sort of insight we could get in terms of mix, units, ASPs. Even if we had a revenue number, it's hard to even break out how many unit sales versus what price they were at.
Speaking of sales, let's go back to Adam Shapiro because he's trying to drill down on some of those numbers. Adam, what do you see?
Okay, so iPhone sales in the quarter were 47.5 million. Now, remember, analysts were expecting on the low end 48 million, on the high end 50 million. The previous quarter was 61 million. Third quarter always slower for iPhone sales, 47.5 million. iPad sales 10.9 million. But what's interesting, when you look at the revenue number and the iPhone sales being a little bit less than perhaps what some analysts were expecting, maybe the watch, when we get that other products number, might have been a big seller. We still have to get that revenue number for other products, which is going to lump the watch in there. But total iPhone sales, 47.5 million.
Okay, thanks, Adam. Drill down a little deeper on that, and I want to bring Brian back in. You know, the third quarter, as I think you even mentioned, is typically the slowest for iPhone sales, still 47.5 million. You know, not much of a beat, kind of right in the middle of what people were looking for. What's your reaction to that number?
Yes, I think it was lower. From what I saw, estimates were about 49 million. It'll be interesting to hear. Another question I have at this point is, what's the impact of China at this point? Is it a macroeconomic issue? Is there any sort of real weakness? Because China has been the growth driver for the iPhone for at least the past 6 months. The other number that I see right away is that services, or the other products revenue of 2.6 billion. That's low. You know, that seemed to imply that there wasn't much watch revenue in the quarter. I think that might be the other problem.
Brian, is that really a surprise, though? I mean, it's hard for me to believe that that's why investors are hammering this, because as soon as they said that they were going to, we realized they were going to try not to break out the watch numbers, you knew that it was a bad number. So it's not particularly surprising that they're kind of trying to bury it at this point. I don't walk around and see people with the watch, so I don't know that that's much of a surprise.
I would call it worse than a bad number, or I would say that, I think what happened with the guidance last quarter, we realized it wasn't going to be a mass market hit. It wasn't going to be a breakout sort of product. But we did get some insight just now in terms of how slow of a start it's getting off to, and apparently it's a slower start than what we were expecting. Again, I'll be curious to see whether it's supply or demand. But a pretty weak number there, especially if you're pinning the next leg of growth on the hopes of the watch.
So what could they say to make you feel better? I mean, what would be the answer on the call that would make you feel better about the watch situation? Do you want to hear that it's supply, or do you want to hear that it's demand, or that they have another idea?
I would be hoping for supply at this point. I think if you look at the fourth quarter forecast, they're not guiding to much more of a revenue beat in Q4 versus Q3. So again, I think that implies that you're not getting a breakout watch number. I think the watch at this point is certainly going to be more of a holiday product anyway, so I wouldn't expect sales to keep ramping up in the fall. But that's how I would kind of think about it at this point. It doesn't look like there's a great outlook for the next 3 months for the watch either.